So in my overview of our joint paper, I'm going to do three things. First, I will address in more detail the implications of recent discussions of the Arab Spring in the Middle East and North African region. Second, I will examine both political science and ethnic studies. And then finally, I will talk in more detail about what we call the idea of Israel and the absence of Palestine. So turning first to the Middle East and North Africa, or MENA region, and the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring, which began in 2011, ushered in a lot of optimism for people and observers of the Middle East and North Africa. But now, close to 5 years on, certain long-standing ideas about democratic exceptionalism continue to condition dominant understandings of the region. So this idea of democratic exceptionalism, we had some discussion of in the first panel this morning. And I would say that the idea can be really found in three features. First, in both the Western Academy and popular discourse, Arab countries have been specifically portrayed as undemocratic in contrast to Israel. Second, the MENA region has been viewed as distinctly undemocratic. And third, Israel has been portrayed as a democracy in keeping with liberal democratic countries like the United States or Canada or France, and in contrast to Arab countries. So these three features can all be graphically seen, for example, in the 2015 online MENA map, which is housed and based on the classification system used by the influential US-based Freedom House. So in looking at the map, viewers are reminded that the MENA region has, quote, historically been the least free region in the world, and also the region is still largely treated as unfree, with only Morocco, Tunisia, Lebanon, and Kuwait classified as partly free. Not least, Israel alone is treated as the only free country in the MENA space, and hence as exceptional. It's relevant to note that the Freedom House classification has been widely used and accepted by specialists in the field of comparative politics and within the discipline of political science, amongst others. So as such, we are particularly concerned in our paper with the propensity to understand and to approach Israel as a free democratic country, kind of exceptional in the region, because this assertion patently ignores certain realities. So at a very basic level, the exceptional placement of Israel is critically related to how Freedom House advances its understanding of Israel's governance and borders. And more specifically, this is done on the basis of reporting on Israel separate from the West Bank and Gaza. But if the populations of Gaza and the West Bank are included in the reporting of Israel, the discussion of elections, and hence democracy, would clearly look different. And this is because these populations are denied statehood and citizenship on the basis of not being Jewish, and yet remain under Israeli control. Now, turning to the second part of my talk on the discipline of political science and the field of ethnic studies, let me just note that this absencing of Palestine and Palestinians emblemized by discussions of Israel as a democracy is part of what feeds a disciplinary tendency to not address race in the context of Israel-Palestine. And this is, of course, further exacerbated by the fact that traditionally political science across its fields and as a whole has tended not to address race. And this is something Abby and I, along with a number of scholars, have addressed, including Deborah Thompson, who's tried to make the case for why race is political and hence a proper subject matter for political scientists. What's really interesting, however, is that the inattention to race cannot explain why it is that in ethnic studies, which is a multidisciplinary field devoted to the study of race and ethnicity, you also find that there aren't examples addressing race in the context of Israel-Palestine. So in the United States, ethnic studies as a discipline emerged in the post-civil rights era. It developed in the context of struggles for academic legitimacy, where there were historic exclusions of non-white intellectuals. But by the 21st century, ethnic studies had come of age as a recognized area of study. However, efforts to theorize differences and linkages among various types of racialized experiences generates some very complex debates in the field about the relationship between critical scholarship and social justice practices. And notably fraught in this context and relevant to the study of Israel-Palestine is the association of Jewish studies with both historic exclusion of Jewish minorities, like other minority groups, and the ascendance of Israel as a powerful militarized state closely associated with U.S. imperialist interests in the Middle East. Within the field of ethnic studies, a series of debates about the ascribed model minority status of American Jews and relationships between African Americans and Jewish Americans have generally found uneasy resolution. They haven't really found resolution, I should say more directly. Now, more recent developments in Jewish cultural studies work, such as that by Daniel and Jonathan Boyarin, hold more promise because they de-link Jewish diasporic cultural identity from a defense or association with the Zionist ideology of the State of Israel. Nonetheless, these issues are inextricably linked in contemporary discussions in scholarship and in public discourse with the complex geopolitics of the Middle East. So what we suggest in our papers that political science has an essential contribution to make in moving the discussion forward. And to this end, we also suggest that the unequal power relations of states that are embedded in and in turn advance racialization demand attention. So without in any way minimizing the centuries-long legacy of anti-Semitism, particularly in European and North American polities, the colonial history and apartheid conditions of Israel demands theoretical attention, and thus attending to Israel in comparative and global context, not as exceptional. Therefore, a method that incorporates the contributions of critical ethnic studies with an emphasis on processes that construct and deconstruct patterns of racialization as part of state hegemonic practices and political ideologies can help advance such a conversation.
Now, these uprisings in 2009 which continued for several months around Iran, they certainly brought back a question which was asked in 1979 by Michel Foucault in his famous articles he wrote for Corriere della Sera, and that's what are the Iranians dreaming of? And well, he asked it in 1979, 36 years ago. We can ask it now today about today's Iran and especially what happened in 2009. And I think that it's an urgent question to ask more than ever. However, when we go through the interpretations of the Iranian protests of 2009, Iranians themselves and people around the world, they have a tendency to project their own passions on the screen and their own interpretations on the screen. The young Iranian Twitter fans, actually, they see it as a social media revolution. The Iranian reformists who have been part of the Iranian regime themselves, they see it as a reformist imperative in the Islamic Republic. And the Iranian human rights activists, they see it as a backlash against the routines, abuses of the Iranian regime. So different interpretations of the same movement, and I think that that's important to have in mind. But actually, there were a full range of different drivers of change involved in bringing about what is called, what we call the Green Movement of 2009. And it's because of this diversity of drivers, I would call, of change, that the movement itself remains what I think is a potential for democratization in Iranian society, but also continues to suffer from some serious weaknesses at the same time. So a potential, but also a potential with some weaknesses. Considering the complexities of the Iranian society and the Iranian politics, and that's why I'm so always so surprised by some American and Canadian, I would say, journalists when they talk about Iran, because I, as an Iranian who has lived there, who went to prison there, who has been working with the civic movement, I find my own society so complex, and it's so difficult to talk about it. And so when as you see an article and you see people talk about it so easily, I say, well, there's something, certainly an enigma there. Since I think there is a complexity, I think it's important to highlight the fact that the Green Movement of 2009, specifically in regards to its democratic beliefs and liberal stance, did not suddenly materialize within the Iranian consciousness in the aftermath of the elections, of the rigged elections. There has been, for those of you who have been working on Iran, you know very well that there has been Iran's historical struggles for establishing an accountable modern government, which could be traced back to the constitutional revolution of 1906. But without going too far, we can say that in the past 25 years, I will not even go back to 1979, but in the past 25 years, there has been a major political and societal evolution in Iran, in Iranian society, which has to do with this young population which you have specimens sitting in this room. Actually, I can see them over there and others, well educated, very secularized minded, I would say, quote unquote, liberal minded. Doesn't mean that they're neoliberals, but they're liberal-minded. And so there has been quite a change in the past 25 years in the Iranian society. And in the past 25 years, there has been an explosive mix of high population growth leading to a youth bulge, combined with urbanization, jobless growth, partly linked to the structural adjustment, and the rapid expansion of university education. We don't talk about it very often, actually. Expansion of university education around Iran, which produced new sociological actors in Iran who were essentially, as I said, young, educated, most of the time women. We have to insist on that, and I think that Victoria Tamasbi is going to talk about it. Certainly, women which played a very important role. And most of the time we're talking, and we still go on talking about it, with young people who saw no political, no economic, no social future for themselves, despite their high level of education and despite the fact that they played a very important civic role. So as a result, we went toward a generational gap which divided the Iranian society, I would say, between essentially money-making and powerful conservatives on the one hand and young rebels without cause on the other hand. If I can say it in North American terms, I would say that Iran has been a society divided between Donald Trumps and James Deans. On the one hand, we have Donald Trumps, and Rafsanjani family is a kind of a Donald Trump family, or Bush family. And on the other hand, we have James Deans, like in the Elia Kazan's movie, Rebels Without Cause, because they have no ideology. They're not really fighting for an ideology as their parents used to fight for Marxism or for Islamism, but they are nevertheless rebels, and they have a rebellious temperament, which I like very much, actually. Therefore, it's not strange that the Iranian youth has been at the forefront of support for the nuclear deal, because they have suffered the most from unemployment and the Iranian currency devaluation as a result of the sanctions. And whether as internet users or spontaneous demonstrators, the young population of Iran, which represents today more than 60% of the 81 million Iranians around the country, as I said, they are well educated and believe in gradual change of Islamic Republic of Iran. So most of them are not revolutionaries, unlike their parents and unlike some of us who are sitting in this panel or sitting in this room, who were certainly in 1979 revolutionaries and believed in the revolution.
So, as the preceding discussion reveals, American social movement theories view social movements as more or less a business-like enterprise. Their emergence, endurance, and impact contingent upon formal organizations, a clear-cut division of labor, and professionalization. Again, factors related to technical expertise. And here's the question. What of those political settings where such mobilizing structures, such as formal organizations and professional staffs, are either non-existent or are severely handicapped by authoritarian regimes? What I want to argue is that with its ubiquitous authoritarian states effectively ruling out mobilizing structures, the Middle East serves as an ideal laboratory in which to examine this claim. From Bahrain to Syria, Saudi Arabia to Iran, repressive states, each with its own particular brand of authoritarianism, have proven most adept at denying their oppositions opportunities to establish formal organizations or recruit professional staffs. So oppositional groups have been forced, for the most part, to go underground from where they conduct clandestine activities. The point to be made here is that in the Middle East, it's the power of ordinary people, not the efficacy of formal organizations and professional staffs, that has the potential to change the rules of the games. For their part, owing to the heavy emphasis on structural conditions, political process theories view the state or the polity, ultimately, as the only field of struggle that really matters with respect to mobilization and collective action. And certainly this fetishization of the state as an entity presenting social movements with opportunities to mobilize is, again, problematic in a Middle East context where such opportunities are seldom, if ever, presented by states determined to maintain the status quo, whatever the cost. In such settings, oppositional groups exist under the constant gaze of a security apparatus, replete with formidable and fearsome paramilitary groups prepared to use whatever means necessary to ensure the survival of the regime. So ultimately, this can hardly be said to constitute a political environment rife with opportunities to mobilize oppositional groups. With survival as their chief primacy, the majority of the Middle East states have perfected what might be called the art of repression. By referring to repression as an art, I aim to underscore the shrewd calculation, the refined skills and practical know-how, the macro-micro techniques and nuanced measures, the intuitive grasp of the psychology of fear, all of which are orchestrated for the purpose of silencing the majority, thereby perpetuating the status quo. And so this explains why, in most Middle East contexts, mobilization emerges in the absence of open opportunities. So these realities compel us to look for factors other than open opportunities in the Middle East if we are to plumb the root causes of collective action. The example of the Arab Spring is instructive in this regard. Indeed, those who filled the streets created their own opportunities that could be described as the attributes of the actors themselves. Perhaps nothing better illustrates this last point than a solitary act of defiance on the part of a young Tunisian street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi. In December 2010, Bouazizi set himself ablaze to protest the confiscation of his wares by municipal officials. So this single incident triggered mass demonstrations throughout the country, precipitating what would come to be called the Arab Spring. Thus, I want to argue that this first flowering of the Arab Spring offers incontrovertible evidence that ordinary people felt compelled to put their lives on the line, spurred on by the moral outrage directed at government authorities who for so long had oppressed them. The lived experience of those filling the streets of Tunisian cities demanding change is nowhere reflected in new social movement theories that take as their datum the technologically advanced and politically open societies of the West. Englehart's much celebrated theory of a post-materialist society is a case in point. According to this luminary, once a society reaches a certain level of socioeconomic achievement, it turns its attention to post-materialist needs such as democracy, gender equality, and human rights, among others. Thus, concludes Englehart, and I read it, because Muslim societies have not transitioned to a post-materialist stage, their younger generations are ill-disposed to such virtues that are the norm in the West. His grand model of causation overlooks the experiences and trajectories of non-European societies with their long struggles for progressive reforms and democratic rights. Some of them dating back to the early decades of the 20th century, the example being the 1906 Constitutional Revolution and Egypt's 1923 Feminist Union. So it is the existence of these struggles that calls into question Englehart's chief determinant of social change, namely the level of economic and technological advancement. His, in my view, is a one-size-fits-all model of social change and, by implication, collective action that is unable to account for radical social change other than that predicated upon an exclusivist experience of European sociality.
So in this paper, I want to begin with a reference, well, with extensive reference to Giorgio Agamben's theory of state of exception, which is intended to be a critical of the way, exceptionalism is carried out today. But I'm going to show how this theory actually defeats the purpose. So I want to focus on the much celebrated theory of state of exception, originally published in Italian in 2003, English translation 2005. The theory has gained enormous influence and currency in academia in the aftermath of 9/11 and the subsequent US-led military operations in the Middle East, regime changes in Afghanistan and Iraq, and following the destabilization of the states in the region, such as in Libya and Syria today. It seems to me, of course, that probably Western political theory needed a Professor Agamben to theorize what every Middle Eastern layperson knows by heart, and that is the ruling powers, the occupying powers, always subject the people to the very laws they exempt themselves from. And my grandmother said that to me when I was a child. So she was illiterate. So I happen to be of the view, of course, that in every age, the scholar and the layperson basically have the same ideas. The idea is in the air, basically. Except one knows it, the scholar knows it with great sophistication and theoretical complexities, and the layperson knows it by heart and intuitively. So, and that is the reason why I want to tell that the activists on the ground and the social movements within the Middle East, and I'll elaborate hopefully on this, based on this shared knowledge, they actually can help us and function for us, who study, these things as the guideposts. And these are the ones, to quote, our beloved Leonard Cohen, these are the ones who know that there is a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in, right? And that crack in everything is very important. So, and this, of course, has ramifications for the way we have traditionally looked at world history. And world history for so long has been following Hegel, of course, has been what Hamid Dabashi calls a choo-choo train theory of world history, in the sense that the rest must follow the West, and everything in the rest, in order to get admission to the capital H history, and everything in the East or in the rest should actually follow the footsteps of the West, which is apparently the most advanced civilizational formation that everyone else has to emulate. But what I'm saying here is that from Chiapas to World Social Forum, to Arab Spring, to Occupy movement, the creative resistances of the poor and oppressed abound. So basically, seen from the point of view of social movements, it seems to me that the world history as such is a little wobbly. Anyways, while I appreciate and teach Agamben's theory actually as a social theorist, I want to show how his theory closes onto itself, and as such it doesn't allow the reader to see the crack in everything. In our case, the crack in the sovereign's exceptionalism. I think this is because, in spite of the critical tone of Agamben's work, he objectifies the sovereign, and thus he cannot see that in treating the other as sacrificial life or homo sacer, through exceptionalism, the sovereign inevitably and inadvertently contributes to the constitution of new resistances against itself. Or put simply, Agamben lacks a theory of agency. So in light of this, I propose an inversion of the theory, a rather weird inversion, I must admit, of the theory of exceptionalism in the limited time that I have, by focusing in the end at progressive social movements. So state of exception, Agamben remarks, constitutes a paradox, because it is the legal form of that cannot have a legal form, and it subjects others to the laws from which the sovereign power is exempted. The idea that the lawgiver, of course, stands outside of the law is not very new. One can find it in Rousseau's social contract. But in the modern age, we have such states as martial law, l'état de siège, war act, and state of emergency that are now enacted basically on, global scale every now and then. And these are all legal manifestations of states of exception. They all authorize the suspension of the laws that protect the citizen and give citizen the rights associated with citizenship. Here, in these cases, the executive power overrides and absorbs the juridical power, and as such, for the duration of such a state of emergency, the rights-bearing citizen is rendered the helpless subject of the sovereign power. Because of the state of exception, because the state of exception is justified based on necessity, based on the exigency of time and circumstance, the legal exceptionalism of the state of exception remains extra-legal. This paradox, the paradox is that the law is fundamentally meant to serve and protect the citizens through rights, but the very necessity that evokes the state of exception suspends citizenship rights in the name of serving and protecting the citizens. The law remains in force, but it is suspended until the circumstance allows for the law's reenactment, and this is when pure violence, in the Benjaminian sense, reveals itself.
So I thought to myself, well, at the same time we see these days, as I briefly mentioned last night, think tanks, some members of the academia actually very much contribute to the new set of knowledge, to use Hamid Dabash's phrase, disposable knowledge, a kind of fast food knowledge which basically produced in the service of imperial, colonial projects of invading other countries in the name of humanitarianism, responsibility to protect, promoting democracy, and basically, as it mentioned, this kind of disposable knowledge, fast food knowledge, there is absolutely no epistemic continuity, no historical base, no contextual analysis. They use it one time, threw it away, and they simply repeat it. You wonder why they keep repeating the same kind of mistake, because this is basically, there is no epistemic continuity. Yasmeen, my colleague, mentioned Charles Mill's concept of epistemic ignorance, this is quite true. And at the same time, I should probably add one more concept, and that's epistemology of not only ignorance, but also arrogance. This epistemology of arrogance basically repeat the same sort of, knowledge, and basically you see the same sort of political action in this part of the world. So in a way, perhaps the solution to this epistemological problem is to use Walter Minolow's concept of epistemic disobedience is perhaps a more fundamental solution. We really need disobey this set of knowledge this kind of theoretical understanding or approach to the study of the Muslim world, Middle East, and perhaps the global South, and probably the whole world, there is a serious epistemological problem, and we need to be brave enough to say enough is enough, you are free, and we simply use the concept of epistemic disobedience. So in a way, if I want to summarize some of the points and make it really specific and tangible, at the risk of simplification, but with the merit of clarity, we can say, generally speaking, and you all know this, I just summarize the point, perhaps there are two major theoretical approaches in the study of this part of the world in general. One would be cultural essentialism, a typical Orientalist, neo-Orientalist discourse, which basically talks about Middle East exceptionalism, Muslim exceptionalism, culture is something static. There is religious centrism in this discourse. Religion is the only available factors, variable factors to explain pretty much everything. Basically singling out the Middle East and the Muslim world as something exceptional and unique to the world. There is a sense of cultural determinism in the sense that there is no internal dynamism. So everything actually should come from outside. This culture is static, it's ignorant, it's irrational, it's arrogant, all sorts of things. And there is also a sense of state centrism, because basically it fails to look at the ordinary people, the acts of ordinary people, and these are the problem. The other perhaps problem of this kind of theoretical approach is that it simply ignores so many other factors and layers of identity of ordinary people in this part of the world. It ignores the role of race, gender, ethnicity, international politics, domestic politics. It's simply reductionist, vast generalization, and very naive and cliche reading of this part of the world. Alternative discourse, perhaps, would be a synthetic approach, which in my view would be something like this: a critical political economy which adds political economy factor to understand what's going on. The interaction of politics, economy, domestic politics, international politics. Then critical sociology, and I underline critical in the sense that we really need to be critical, because the mainstream political economy, mainstream sociology, and mainstream disciplines of these things are not quite helpful. Critical sociology in the sense that it saves us from a state-centric approach. You really need to look at sociology, ordinary people, how actually people behave. And this is absolutely important and missing in the mainstream academia. And the third element of this theoretical approach is perhaps something we can call it critical post-colonialism. Well, post-colonialism has bad names these days, because apparently the understanding of conventional post-colonialism is that you simply blame the West, the external factor. There is no agency for domestic factors, and that's it. And you say, well, we are free, we are the best, the West is the worst, and basically blame everything to the West. Or simply blame colonialism and its legacy for your failure. This is not probably the correct reading, or I guess appropriate reading of critical post-coloniality. In critical post-coloniality, apparently, you see a synthetic approach which understands the interaction of domestic and global factor. Culture, society, politics, economy, and at the same time, one really important element of critical post-coloniality is that post-coloniality and post-colonialism is not simply a descriptive phrase to discuss a certain historical period. It's a state of discipline and some sort of epistemological understanding of what's going on. In a way, critical post-coloniality tells us that, unlike what we see in the cultural essentialism, what we really need to understand in terms of politics of identity is hybridity of our identity. What is important here is that people in the Muslim world, in the Middle East, like the rest of the world, they have different layers of identity. They are definitely more than Muslim. you have basically synthesized all these factors together and talk about hybrid identity. So in a way, if I want to summarize the point, we should not be really surprised to see this kind of essentialist, state-centered, naive kind of discourse and argument about the Middle East and the Muslim world and the rest of the global south. Actually, it's repeating itself, even in 2015.